Okay, folks, here is tutorial 1 for the FaderPort. This will be pretty much FaderPort basics, button layout, and explaining what they are. And then the next one will be for setting it up. So I'm actually going to use my document for the button layout to go along with, because I always forget what's what. I always need a guide. So the FaderPort has a column of buttons down the left side, and they are as follows, and I will explain as many of these as I can, because I too am still learning about the more advanced features of the FaderPort, and there are things that I won't know. So there are buttons that I'm going to kind of glance over as we go along, so be prepared for that. But it's for the more advanced stuff, so this won't hinder your ability to do basic work. So the top button, on the top left, there's like this column of buttons right underneath the pan knob, are as follows. Arm. Now, this is a toggle button, so it toggles between arm and select. And the button, the row of buttons to the right of this arm button are these rectangular buttons that are underneath all of the LCD windows. Those are either select or arm, depending on what mode you're in. And it's a toggle. So you're either in select or you're in arm. And it might seem kind of counterintuitive because you're like, well, how will I know which mode I'm in? Well, if you hit the button and then you arm the first track and you hear it, then you know you're in arm. If you're not hearing it, you know you're in select. And usually in your recording, what you want to do is get into a mode that you're going to hang out in for a while. So if you're recording a bunch of tracks, put them up on your FaderPort, get yourself into arm mode, and then just start working. So you'd arm the first track, record it all, unarm it, arm the second track, record it all. And then when you go to edit, then you can put this thing in select mode and start selecting and editing and whatnot. It'll make sense that way. If you try to switch back and forth all the time, you'll get yourself confused. All right, so the next button is solo clear. That is does what it says. It just clears your solos. The next one is mute clear. Does what it says. It clears your mutes. Bypass. If you're inside of a plugin, you can bypass that plugin. Macro. This acts as the compare button. Now what compare does inside of a plugin is you can choose 2 plugin presets in a row, and it'll compare the two, so you don't have to keep switching back and forth. So let's say you had an EQ and you chose preset 1 and preset 100. Then when you hit this macro button, it's going to switch between preset 1 and preset 100. It makes it very easy for you to compare the plugin presets. Link. This acts as an assign of sorts. I think this is a way for you to actually get into the plugin menu and assign a plugin to an insert. I wouldn't recommend trying this because that doesn't seem like an accessible way of doing it, because I think it just does it on the board. I might be wrong, but you actually use the faders to move them up and down to move the menus, and so that would seem like it wouldn't be very accessible. It's kind of like the way the Artist Mix and the S-Series consoles do it, where you can assign plugins on the board itself. It's not as cool as the way that the Command 8 and the Control 24 does it, where you hit the insert button and it actually brings up the menu that you can use the keyboard with. I'm thinking that that's probably not how it works. Haven't tried it. If one of you guys are brave and want to try it, go for it. The next button is a big square button, and that's the shift. We're in the bottom row on the bottom of the column on the left side. This is a shift. It is not a keyboard shift. It's actually its own modifier. So like when you hold it down and use the pan knob, you're panning the right side if you have a stereo track. You can hold it down and use some other buttons, and they have different functions. So it is its own modifier. It is not the same as the keyboard shift like on some other control surfaces. Okay, so going back to the top, on the top left of the board, you have a pan knob. It's detented, and it can also press in. Haven't really figured out what pressing it in does. Haven't seen that implemented anywhere that I've used it yet. To the right and just below the pan knob where you'll see the LCDs are these rectangular buttons. There's 8 of them. Those act as either select or arm, depending on what mode you're in. We've talked about that before. Underneath the select buttons, you'll see a row of 16 small buttons. These are mute and solo, mute and solo, mute and solo, all the way across. Now, this might seem a little counterintuitive because we're used to seeing control surface channel strips have mute and solo on top of one another. Well, the way they've done this is they've emulated how a mute and solo configuration actually looks inside of Pro Tools, because in the Pro Tools channel strip, mute and solo are next to one another. So, yeah, and sometimes it's confusing because you have 16 of these and you're like, well, I want to solo this track, and you have to like count over, and it's kind of a pain, but it is what it is. Okay, so to the right, let me scroll down on my document here. Okay, down right side. All right, here we go. So the top button, now these buttons are the same kind of column that's down the left side of the board as well. So it's very similar. But what these do is these determine what your faders are going to do. So the top one is track. If you're lost and your faders aren't working and you can't figure out why nothing's happening, hit this button. It's like your home button. It will put your faders back into track mode, which means that the faders will control the track volume. Edit plugins. When you are in this mode, your faders will control plugin parameters for whatever plugin is selected. And we'll get into that in another tutorial on how to actually use fader flip. Sends. You could put sends on fader. So you could be on a track, hit the sends button, and if you have multiple sends up, you can control those send volumes with the faders. It's very convenient. Pan. You can actually use the faders to control pan. I don't know if anybody's found that to be convenient or not, but it's there. Audio. Okay, so a couple of these, I don't know what they do inside of the Huey mode. So there's audio, VI, probably virtual instrument, bus, VCA, all. I haven't quite figured out if those actually work inside of Pro Tools, but we'll have to experiment and see what they do and figure it out. There are several pieces of documentation in the PT Access Dropbox that tell you, what does what inside of Pro Tools. And the last button, again, is a big square button that is shift. It's like a right shift. It's, again, the same type of modifier that's for the board itself. It is not a keyboard shift. Okay, so to the right of the column, kind of in the middle of this column, there are 6 buttons that are 3 on top of each other. So it's a 6-button matrix, and it's above the big, huge data dial. These are your automation modes. Latch is the top left. Trim is the middle top. Off is top right. Touch is bottom left. Right is middle. Read is bottom right. All right. Now, we have this big data wheel. And this data wheel can function as many different things. Also, to the left and right of the data wheel are previous and next. They're arrow keys. They actually do the same thing as the data wheel. But if you need something, like if you're banking channels or something, and you want to press previous to next instead of turning the wheel, you can. Okay, underneath that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 buttons in a 4x4 matrix. And they control what this data wheel does. Data wheel. Next. Okay. So, the first one on the top left is channel. When you're in this mode, if you move the data wheel, it will bank by channel. So it's like 1 through 8, 2 through 9, 3 through 10. So things like that. You can also use the previous and next buttons to bank by channel. If you press previous and next together, it will put you back at the start.
Zoom.
The second one is zoom. This controls your horizontal zoom, which I think would actually, I haven't tried it, but it might control the nudge level as well. Again, haven't really messed with that.
Scroll.
The next one is scroll. This is scrub/shuttle. So if you press it once, you're going to be
Back.
in scrub, I think, and if you press it again, you're going to be in shuttle. And then if you move the data wheel, it will actually act as a scrub wheel. People prefer bigger scrub wheels that aren't detented, so it might seem counterintuitive to some of you to use it as a scroll wheel, which makes perfect sense. I totally get that.
Scroll back.
The next one on the top right is bank. This goes by banks of 8, so you can hit it in this mode, and now you're 1 through 8, 9 through 16, on and on and on. You can use the data wheel, or the previous to next will get you through your banks as well. The bottom 4,
Master.
the bottom left is master. This will actually control the level of your master fader. I thought I read somewhere that the Pro Tools guys couldn't get this to work. Maybe the firmware has fixed this.
Click.
Click is the next one. This will turn your click level up and down, I think, or toggle it on and off. I'm not sure. There's not enough explanation as to how that works.
Section.
Section. And,
Marker.
okay, so section, I don't know if section works or not. Marker does work. And that's the last button on the bottom right. And what this does is it allows you to use previous and next to go through your markers. You can also turn the dial and go through your markers. You can press the dial down, and it will actually drop a marker for you. Also, there's mention in the manual of F1 through F8. I think if Shift is held down, these buttons underneath the scroll wheel will actually act as function keys. And the function keys will do different things inside of Pro Tools, and there's some write-up in there about what some of these do. They're a little bit more advanced. Okay, so there's a weird configuration of buttons on the bottom right of this unit, and these are the transport controls. There's 3 smaller buttons on the top. I don't know what the leftmost one does. I don't know if that toggles loop on and off. I haven't been able to figure that out. Then there's rewind and fast forward. If you press rewind and fast forward together, it acts as return to 0. Then there's little button, big button, little button. And that is stop, play, record. The play is the giant circular button in the middle of the 2 little buttons. And that's it. Besides the faders, that is all of the buttons on the FaderPort 8. And so the next piece will be how to set this thing up and get it going for Pro Tools.